AITA for cutting off my sister's wedding fund after my parents sold my inheritance? I'm Leah, 37, and being the oldest daughter in my family always meant I was expected to notice the mess, clean it up, and then pretend nobody had handed me the broom. My mother, Pamela, called that being mature. My father, Gordon, called it keeping the peace. My younger sister, Sophie, usually called it not making everything a big deal. In my family, being dependable meant everyone depended on you until you disappeared. Sophie was 7 years younger than me, and the rules had always bent around her. When she forgot a phone bill in college, Mom called me and said, "Can you cover it just this once? She's under a lot of pressure." When I asked when I would get the money back, Dad said I was being rigid. When Sophie borrowed my winter coat and lost it at a party, Mom told me not to turn a mistake into a family crisis. Sophie cried, apologized for about 30 seconds, and then somehow I ended up comforting her because she felt so guilty. Even at a birthday dinner that was supposed to be for me, Mom spent 10 minutes praising Sophie for keeping everyone's spirits up, while Sophie waved off the waiter and ordered another bottle of wine on the card I had put down. None of those incidents were big enough on their own to justify a war. That was how the pattern survived. Every favor was small. Every boundary was framed as an overreaction. Every time I gave in, my family treated it as proof that I had never minded. The only person who never asked me to make myself smaller was my grandfather, Arthur. When I was a kid, I spent long afternoons at his kitchen table under a brass lamp, while he showed me how to hold a coin by its edges. He kept cotton gloves in a wooden drawer, but he rarely wore them himself. He said careful hands mattered more than fancy equipment. His collection filled several dark blue trays and 2 steel storage boxes. To everyone else, it looked like rows of old metal in plastic sleeves. To Arthur, every coin was a piece of a larger story. He taught me how to find a mint mark, how to recognize cleaning damage, and how a coin that looked ordinary could be rare because of one tiny difference in the date. The first coin he ever gave me was a worn silver dime. It wasn't especially valuable. He slid it across the table in a clear sleeve and said, "Every coin has a story if someone cares enough to listen." I still had that dime. One afternoon when I was about 16, I asked him which coin in the collection was worth the most. He smiled and tapped the edge of one tray. "Value isn't always the number someone pays," he said. "Sometimes it's the person who remembers why it mattered." That was Arthur. He could say something sentimental without sounding sentimental. My parents never understood why I cared about the collection. Mom called it Grandpa's little hobby. Dad once suggested Arthur sell the whole thing and use the money for a family cruise. Sophie used to complain that the storage boxes smelled old. Arthur noticed. He also noticed that I was the only person who sat with him long enough to learn what he had. When he died, I was prepared for grief. I wasn't prepared for how quickly everyone else began talking about his belongings, as if he had left behind a warehouse that needed to be cleared before dinner. Mom became the temporary executor of the estate. Arthur's attorney, Marjorie, handled the probate filings and explained the major bequests during a meeting a few weeks after the funeral. We sat around a polished conference table, while Mom kept straightening the papers in front of her. Marjorie read through the relevant provisions in a level voice. Sophie received a cash bequest. Dad and Mom received portions of the remaining estate. A few smaller items went to other relatives. Then Marjorie reached the collection. Arthur's numismatic collection, including all cataloged coins, trays, storage boxes, provenance notes, and related materials, is a separate bequest to Leah, she said. She looked directly at my mother. Not to the estate generally. Not to the family collectively. It goes to Leah. Mom gave a tight smile. "Yes, we understand." I believed her. That's the part I've replayed the most. Not the later shouting, not the waiver, not the frozen account. That small smile and the words, "We understand." Probate moved slowly but normally for several months. I didn't push about the coins because Marjorie had explained that assets still needed to be inventoried, secured, and formally distributed. Mom sent occasional updates. Dad said paperwork took time. I had no reason to think the collection was anywhere except Arthur's storage unit, where it had been moved after his death. Meanwhile, Sophie's wedding grew from a modest ceremony into something that sounded like a corporate awards gala. She and her fiancé, Connor, had originally talked about a smaller wedding. Then Mom got involved. Suddenly there was a ballroom with a high deposit, a custom floral installation, a live band, upgraded table settings, a rehearsal dinner at a private venue, and a photographer whose package cost more than my first car. Sophie sent photos in the family chat and talked about the wedding as if it were a public service. People need something beautiful to look forward to, she said one Sunday over lunch. I asked whether she and Connor were comfortable with the budget. Mom answered for her. They have it handled. Connor looked slightly uncomfortable, but Sophie squeezed his arm and said, Mom found a way to help. At the time, I assumed Mom was using part of her eventual inheritance or savings. It was none of my business, so I didn't ask. About 6 weeks before the wedding, Marjorie emailed that probate was nearing the stage where separate bequests could be transferred. I called Mom that evening. When can I pick up the coin collection? I asked. There was a pause long enough for me to hear a cabinet close in the background. It's safe, she said. That wasn't my question. We're dealing with a lot right now, Leah. Safe where? Dad's voice came from farther away. Don't start interrogating your mother. I'm asking where Grandpa's collection is. Mom sighed. We'll talk about it after Sophie's wedding. That answer made no sense. The collection wasn't connected to the wedding. It didn't require seating arrangements or vendor confirmations. It was property Arthur had left to me. I said, I'd like to pick it up before then. Sophie, who was apparently also in the room, suddenly started talking loudly about a problem with the seating chart. Mom took the opening. I have to go. Your sister is dealing with a crisis. The call ended. I stood in my kitchen holding my phone and trying to decide whether I was overreacting. That question had been trained into me. It was the family's first line of defense. Before I could question them, I questioned myself. 3 days later, I received a call from a woman named Lenora. She introduced herself as a senior specialist with an auction house. Her tone was polite but cautious. I'm trying to verify a provenance note connected to a recent private sale, she said. Your name appears in the original handwritten inventory. I felt something tighten in my chest. What collection? She named Arthur. For a moment, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her. I asked her to repeat it. She did. Lenora explained that the auction house had handled a private sale of Arthur's numismatic collection. The consignment paperwork had been signed by Pamela in her capacity as executor. The buyer had paid $112,000. Most of the collection had been prepared for transfer, but there were still a few items awaiting final verification. I assumed you were part of the approval process, Lenora said, because your name was attached to several of Mr. Arthur's notes. I was not. Silence. Then her voice changed. It became more formal. Are you saying you did not consent to the consignment? I'm saying the collection was left to me in his will, and this is the first time anyone has told me it was sold. Lenora didn't offer opinions. She was too careful for that. She said, I think we need to pause this conversation until our legal department reviews the file. Before you do, please preserve every record connected to the transaction. Consignment forms, buyer communications, payment records, item lists, and provenance notes. There was another pause. Understood, she said. I asked for the sale date. When she gave it to me, I wrote it down twice. The collection had been sold after the probate inventory listed it as my separate bequest, but before it had been formally transferred to me. That timing mattered, though I didn't yet understand how much. I didn't call my mother immediately. I sat at my dining table and wrote down everything Lenora had said. I saved the call log. I opened every email I had from Marjorie. I found the probate inventory and searched until I saw the line. Arthur's numismatic collection. Separate bequest to Leah. I took screenshots and saved copies in 2 different places. Then I called Mom. She answered on the 4th ring. Did you sell Grandpa's coins? No greeting. No easing into it. She went quiet. That was my answer. Dad picked up another phone in the house. What is this about? I got a call from the auction house. Mom exhaled sharply. They had no business calling you. They called because my name was in Grandpa's inventory notes. Did you sell the collection? It was sitting in a box, Leah. The calm way she said it made me feel colder than yelling would have. It wasn't sitting in a box. It was left to me. Sophie needed help. I looked at the probate inventory on my screen. You sold my inheritance for her wedding. Don't say it like that. How else would you say it? Mom's voice took on the polished tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable in front of other people. Sophie is building a real future. The wedding is important to both families. Your grandfather cared about family, and he wouldn't have wanted everyone fighting over coins. Dad joined in. Exactly. Arthur would have wanted the money used for something meaningful. He put my name in the will. It was an asset in the estate, Dad said. Your mother was handling the estate. That didn't make it hers. Mom snapped. I was the executor. Temporary executor. I had authority to manage the assets. Did you ask Marjorie before you sold it? Neither of them answered. I said, did you ask me? Mom's patience broke. We didn't ask because you would have said no. The room around me seemed to go completely still. Then you knew exactly whose permission you didn't have. Dad made a tired sound. This is what you do, Leah. You turn everything into a legal argument. No. You turned it into a legal argument when you sold property named in a will. Mom said, you have always had to be difficult when Sophie is happy. That sentence told me more than she intended. In her mind, my ownership of the collection wasn't a fact. It was an obstacle to Sophie's happiness. How much of the money went to the wedding? I asked. That is private. It came from my property. Dad said, lower your voice. I hadn't raised it. Mom said, we will discuss this after the wedding when you are less emotional. I almost laughed. Instead I said, do not move any more money. Do not sign anything else. Do not contact the auction house and tell them I approved this. Mom replied, you don't give orders in this family. The call ended. 10 minutes later, Sophie called me crying. Not quiet tears. Full wedding emergency crying, with sharp breaths and words running together. Why are you doing this right now? I'm not the one who did this. Mom said you're threatening to sue everyone. I asked why they sold something Grandpa left to me. You know how stressed she is. I stared at the wall. Sophie, where did you think the wedding money came from? I thought Mom handled it. That's not an answer. She said the estate had assets. Did she tell you one of those assets was Grandpa's coin collection? Sophie hesitated. It was only 2 or 3 seconds, but I knew her. She filled silence whenever she was telling the truth. She paused when she was editing. I don't know all the legal details, she said. That's not the same as not knowing. She started crying harder. You are embarrassing me in front of Connor's family. The venue has deadlines. The florist has deadlines. Do you understand what happens if you make Mom pull the money? Do you understand what happened when she sold something that belonged to me? It wasn't like you were going to use the coins. That was the first honest sentence she said. I replied, so you did know. No, I knew there were coins. I didn't know Grandpa specifically left them to you. I didn't believe her, but I had no proof yet. She said, can't you just wait until after the wedding? We can figure it out then. What exactly would be left to figure out after the money is spent? She accused me of hating her. She said I had always judged her. She said I cared more about old objects than her happiness. I let her talk until she ran out of accusations. Then I said, I'm not asking to be chosen over you. I'm asking not to be stolen from. She hung up. The next morning, I called Marjorie's office. Her assistant said she was in court and would return my call. I sent a short email marked urgent and attached the probate inventory. Before Marjorie called back, I received a screenshot from my cousin, who had gotten it from another relative. It showed a text Sophie had sent Mom 2 weeks before the auction sale. Just don't tell Leah until after the wedding. She'll make it about Grandpa. I read it several times. There was no legal language in the message. Sophie hadn't said she knew the collection was a separate bequest. But she knew enough to want me kept in the dark. She knew the coins were connected to Grandpa. She knew I would object. She chose the wedding deadline over a direct conversation with me. That was when my sympathy for Sophie stopped being automatic. I saved the screenshot. I saved it again to a separate drive. Then I forwarded it to Marjorie. Mom called that afternoon and invited me to dinner on Sunday. We need to handle this like a family, she said. What does that mean? It means no lawyers, no threats, no embarrassing your sister. I already contacted Marjorie. Her voice sharpened. That was unnecessary. She is Grandpa's estate attorney. I am the executor. For now. The silence on the other end was immediate and heavy. Mom said, Sunday at 6. Tessa and Warren will be there. Connor too. We are going to talk calmly. I understood exactly what she was doing. She was building an audience. She wanted enough relatives in the room to make my refusal look cruel. I agreed to go. Before Sunday, I spoke with Marjorie. She didn't react dramatically when I told her what had happened. She asked dates. She asked whether I had the auction receipt. She asked whether Pamela had deposited the proceeds into an estate account or transferred them elsewhere. She asked for the screenshot, voicemails, emails, and the exact language of the inventory. When I started explaining what my mother had said about family, Marjorie interrupted me. Do not argue with them over feelings, she said. Send me documents. That sentence steadied me. I sent everything I had. Lenora, after consulting the auction house's legal department, provided a copy of the consignment authorization and the private sale receipt. The sale amount was $112,000. Pamela had signed as executor. The paperwork didn't include my consent. It also didn't include any amendment to Arthur's will or any court order authorizing the sale of my separate bequest. Lenora confirmed that the buyer had received part of the collection, but one tray and several individual coins were still in the auction house's control because provenance checks were incomplete. Marjorie sent a formal preservation request demanding that the auction house retain all consignment forms, buyer communications, payment records, item photographs, shipment records, and provenance notes. She also instructed me not to sign anything at dinner. I said, "You think they're going to ask me to? I think your mother is aware the paperwork does not show your consent." Sunday evening, I arrived to find more people than Mom had mentioned. My Aunt Tessa was there. So was my Uncle Warren. Sophie and Connor sat together at the table. 2 cousins were in the living room. Dad stood near the counter pouring drinks as if this were a normal family meal. Mom had made roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and rolls. It was the kind of meal she served when she wanted the house to smell comforting before she said something controlling. She kissed my cheek at the door. "We're going to keep this civil," she whispered. "I am civil." That tone is exactly what I mean. We ate for almost 20 minutes before anyone mentioned the collection. Mom talked about centerpieces. Sophie complained that one of the bridesmaids had not confirmed her hotel. Dad asked Connor about work. Tessa kept glancing at me. Then Mom cleared the plates, returned with a single sheet of paper, and placed it in front of me. Pen was already beside it. "Read this," she said. I did. The document said I voluntarily authorized the estate to liquidate Arthur's coin collection and apply the proceeds to family purposes. It stated that I waived any claim against the executor, the estate, my parents, Sophie, and any third party involved in the sale. It was written in the past tense, as if I had agreed before the sale happened. At the bottom was a blank signature line and a space for notarization. I looked up. "This says I approved the sale." Mom folded her hands. "It confirms that you're willing to keep this in the family. It says I agreed before you sold it." Dad leaned back in his chair. "It's just wording. It's a lie." Sophie wiped her eyes before any tears had actually fallen. "Please, Leah. The wedding is almost here." I looked at Connor. His expression had changed. He was reading the page upside down from where he sat. Mom said, "Sign it. Don't punish your sister because you're hurt." "I'm not signing this." Her jaw tightened. "You have more than Sophie does. You always have. That has nothing to do with ownership. You don't need $112,000. You didn't ask what I needed. You decided what you wanted." Dad tapped the table with 2 fingers. "Enough. Your mother was trying to help your sister. With my inheritance. Arthur would have understood. Marjorie said he was very clear." Mom's eyes flashed. "You already dragged Marjorie into this? She is the estate attorney. This is a private family matter." It stopped being private when you sold the collection through an auction house. One of my cousins shifted uncomfortably in the living room. Mom lowered her voice. You always cared more about being right than being loved. The line was meant to hurt me. It did. But it also made something very clear. Love, in my mother's definition, meant signing whatever made her choices easier. I pushed the paper back across the table. Then you should have stolen from someone who cared less about the truth. Dad stood up. Do not talk to your mother like that. I stood too, picked up my bag and left. I didn't yell. I didn't slam the door. I didn't take the waiver. I photographed it first. By Monday morning, Marjorie had a copy. She called me into her office that afternoon. When I arrived, she had Arthur's estate file open on the conference table. There is something you need to see, she said. She removed a sealed envelope from the file. The front had my name in Arthur's handwriting. Inside was a notarized letter Arthur had signed several months before his death. It didn't magically transfer money or bypass probate. Marjorie made that clear. It wasn't a substitute for the will. But it explained his intent in unusually specific terms. Arthur wrote that the collection was meant for me alone because I had preserved its history and understood its significance. He stated that if any heir, executor, or family member concealed, sold, pledged, or transferred the collection without my informed written consent, Marjorie was to use every lawful estate remedy available to seek reimbursement before further distribution to the responsible parties. The letter also referenced notes he had made identifying individual coins and trays. I read the page twice. My vision blurred on the second pass. Your grandfather knew your family better than they thought he did, Marjorie said. Can this fix it? It strengthens the record of intent. It does not skip the process. She explained that Pamela, as executor, had a fiduciary duty to administer the estate according to the will. Selling a specifically bequeathed asset and diverting the proceeds for someone else's benefit could support a petition to suspend or remove her, demand a full accounting, and seek reimbursement or surcharge against her share of the estate. If Gordon had participated in moving or spending the proceeds, he could also face a repayment demand. The no contest clause in Arthur's will might become relevant depending on what arguments they made, but Marjorie warned me not to treat it like an automatic punishment button. Courts do not enjoy family theatrics, she said. They care about authority, notice, records, and where the money went. What do we do first? We preserve what remains, stop further movement of disputed funds, and get Pamela away from the checkbook. For the next 2 days I didn't post online. I didn't warn relatives. I didn't threaten Sophie. I gathered timestamps. Marjorie prepared a petition seeking Pamela's temporary suspension as executor and the appointment of a neutral fiduciary. She requested an immediate accounting of the sale proceeds and any transfers connected to Sophie's wedding. Certified letters went to Mom, Dad, and the financial institution holding the relevant estate funds. The auction house received a second preservation notice and a demand not to release the remaining tray or coins. I kept the certified mail receipts and tracking confirmations. Then Mom left me a voicemail. Her voice was angry but controlled. We needed the money before Sophie's payment deadline. And you're acting like paperwork matters more than your sister. You can still fix this by signing the waiver. If the venue loses the deposit, that is on you. The voicemail had a timestamp from 3 days before a major wedding payment was due. I saved it to my phone, my computer, and a cloud account. Then I forwarded it to Marjorie. She called 10 minutes later. That was helpful, she said. It was the closest she came to sounding pleased. The court didn't hold an instant dramatic trial. There was no judge pounding a gavel while my mother confessed. What happened was less theatrical and much more effective. The petition and supporting documents were filed. The financial institution received notice that estate-linked funds were disputed. The court issued a temporary restriction preventing further distribution of those funds, while Pamela's authority and accounting were reviewed. The neutral fiduciary process began. 3 days after the waiver dinner, the account being used for several remaining wedding payments was frozen. Sophie called me 13 times. Mom called 6. Dad left one message telling me I had gone too far. I listened to none of them until that evening. Sophie's first voicemail was crying. The second was angry. By the fourth, she was demanding that I call the bank and explain the misunderstanding. In the seventh, she said the ballroom needed clean payment by noon the next day or it could release the date. In the 10th, she said Connor's parents were asking questions. Dad's message was short. You made your point. Now undo it. My point wasn't revenge. My point was that they didn't have legal permission to spend the money. I didn't call the bank. I couldn't have removed the restriction by myself even if I wanted to. That was another thing my family refused to understand. Once the matter entered probate procedure, it was no longer controlled by whoever could apply the most emotional pressure over the phone. Mom responded by organizing another family confrontation. This time it happened at the rehearsal dinner, which had been scaled down and moved to a relative's home because the original vendor wanted replacement payment from a clean source. I hadn't planned to attend. Marjorie advised me not to discuss the pending estate matter beyond what was necessary. Then Aunt Tessa called. Your mother is telling everyone you froze Sophie's personal savings because you wanted the coins for yourself, she said. The money came from the sale. I know that now. Most people there don't. I asked whether Connor knew about Sophie's text. Tessa went quiet. What text? That decided it. I arrived with a large envelope, not because I wanted a performance, but because I was tired of Pamela telling a story that depended on nobody seeing the documents. The house was crowded and tense. Half the guests pretended to be busy with food. The other half watched me walk in. Mom stood near the dining table in a dark blue dress. She looked composed in the way she always did when she believed an audience favored her. I'm surprised you came, she said. You invited everyone else into it. Sophie sat beside Connor. Her eyes were swollen. Connor looked exhausted. Dad stepped forward. This is not the place. You made it the place. Mom looked around at the relatives. Your sister only gets married once, she said to me. Are you really going to make this about money? No. You made it about money when you sold what wasn't yours. A cousin muttered that I was being cruel. Someone else said Sophie had already suffered enough. Mom raised a hand as if she were calming a room she had not inflamed. I tried to handle this privately. Leah refused every compromise. I put the envelope on the table. What compromise? The waiver was a way to protect everyone. It was a statement saying I approved the sale before it happened. Dad rubbed his forehead. Not this again. I opened the envelope and removed copies of the will excerpt, the estate inventory page, the auction receipt, Sophie's text, the preservation request, the court filing, and the notice concerning Pamela's suspension. I spread them across the table. You all heard their version, I said. Now you can read the paperwork. Nobody moved at first. Then Tessa picked up the inventory page. Warren took the auction receipt. Connor reached for the screenshot of Sophie's text. Sophie tried to grab it first. Connor, that's private. He pulled his hand back, not because he agreed with her, but because the sentence had surprised him. What is it? He asked. I slid another copy toward him. He read it. Just don't tell Leah until after the wedding. She'll make it about Grandpa. His face changed slowly. He looked at Sophie, then at Pamela. You knew she wasn't supposed to know? Sophie shook her head too quickly. I didn't know the legal details. You knew enough to hide it. Mom said Leah would make a scene. I almost laughed at the irony. I hadn't made a scene. I had filed paperwork. Mom stepped in. Sophie was trying to protect her wedding from unnecessary drama. Warren held up the auction receipt. $112,000 is not unnecessary drama, Dad said. Arthur wanted the family cared for. Warren looked at him. Gordon, stop calling it family first. You put one daughter first and told the other one to pay for it. Dad's face went red. That is not what happened. I took out my phone. There's more. Mom's expression finally slipped. Leah, don't. I played her voicemail. Her own voice filled the room. We needed the money before Sophie's payment deadline. And you're acting like paperwork matters more than your sister. You can still fix this by signing the waiver. When it ended, nobody spoke. Tessa looked at Mom. Did Leah ever agree to this? Mom pressed her lips together. That's not the point. Tessa's voice sharpened. It is exactly the point. Warren placed the receipt back on the table. You sold property left to Leah, used the money for Sophie, and then tried to make Leah sign a document saying she had agreed. What part of that are we supposed to misunderstand? Dad stared at the floor. Mom looked at me with open anger. You enjoyed this? No. You came here prepared to humiliate us. I came prepared because you lied to everyone in the room. Sophie stood so fast her chair scraped against the floor. You couldn't wait until after the wedding? Her voice broke on the last word. I looked at her. You could have waited until after asking me. I thought Mom handled it. You thought that because not asking helped you. She started crying. I didn't know she could get in legal trouble. That was not the question you cared about in your text. Connor pushed his chair back. Sophie turned to him. Please don't do this here. He looked at the papers again. I can handle a smaller wedding, he said. I can't handle finding out you hid this from your sister and expected me to call it normal. I didn't hide it from you. You told me your parents were giving us money from the estate. You did not tell me the money came from something left to Leah. Sophie reached for his hand. He stepped back. Mom said, Connor, this is a family misunderstanding. Marjorie's voice wasn't in the room, but I heard her words in my head. Signatures, dates, and a fiduciary duty. I said, it is not a misunderstanding. It is an estate matter. Connor looked at Sophie. I need a pause. The room seemed to react all at once. Sophie cried louder. Mom accused me of poisoning him. Dad told Connor not to make decisions while emotional. Two relatives began talking over each other. Someone turned off the music in the next room. Connor didn't change his mind. He said he wasn't ending the relationship that night, but the wedding would not go forward on schedule. He needed to understand what Sophie knew, what she had accepted, and why she had thought hiding the source of the money was reasonable. Sophie blamed me. I didn't defend myself. The documents were still on the table. I left before the argument ended. The fallout lasted months. Pamela was temporarily suspended as executor and ordered to produce a full accounting. A neutral fiduciary took control of the remaining estate administration. The accounting showed that the auction proceeds had first entered an estate-linked account and were then transferred in several payments connected to the venue, florist, rehearsal dinner, and other wedding expenses. Dad had approved 2 of the transfers and had communicated with the bank about one of them. His name was added to the repayment demand. The venue didn't keep the full ballroom reservation without clean replacement funds. Some deposits were partially refundable. Others were not. A few vendors agreed to return money once they understood the payments were tied to a disputed estate asset, but they deducted cancellation fees allowed under their contracts. Connor and Sophie postponed the wedding indefinitely. For several weeks, Mom told relatives that I had destroyed the engagement over a few old coins. That story became harder to maintain once the estate accounting circulated among the people legally entitled to see it. Tessa called me and apologized. I should have asked questions years ago, she said. Your mother always made it sound like you were the difficult one because you were the only person who asked for details. Warren didn't apologize because he hadn't blamed me. He simply said, Arthur would be furious. Some relatives stopped contacting me entirely. A few sent vague messages saying they hoped we could all move forward. I didn't respond to messages that treated accountability like a weather event. The auction house cooperated with the neutral fiduciary. Because the transfer had not been fully completed, one coin tray and several individual coins were returned to the estate pending resolution. Recovering the rest was more complicated. The buyer had acted through the auction house and claimed to have relied on Pamela's apparent authority as executor. Marjorie didn't promise a perfect recovery. We have leverage, she told me. We do not have a time machine. The parties entered mediation. The final resolution wasn't cinematic, but it was real. I received the recovered tray and coins after the court approved their transfer to me. The missing portion of the collection was appraised using the auction records, photographs, Arthur's catalog notes, and comparable sales. Compensation came from the remaining distributive shares allocated to Mom and Dad, along with money recovered from refundable vendor payments and other estate adjustments. Pamela lost control of the estate permanently. She wasn't marched away in handcuffs. That was never the likely outcome. She did, however, lose the authority she had treated as ownership. She had to provide records, answer questions through counsel, and watch a neutral fiduciary undo what could still be undone. Dad continued to insist that he had only been trying to avoid conflict. Warren gave him the best answer I heard during the entire process. You avoided conflict with Pamela by creating damage for Leah. That is still a choice. Sophie sent me a long email 6 weeks after the postponed wedding. She said she was sorry that things had gotten so out of hand. She said she never meant to steal from me. She said Mom had promised everything was legal. Then she asked whether I would be willing to tell Connor that she hadn't understood the seriousness of the situation. I read the email twice. There was no direct apology for the text. No acknowledgement that she had wanted me kept in the dark. No promise to repay anything. She wanted me to repair her relationship by softening the truth. I didn't do it. I sent one reply. You knew enough to hide the source of the money from me. What you tell Connor about that is your responsibility. After that, I put all communication in writing. I told Mom and Dad that I wouldn't attend family meetings designed to pressure me. I wouldn't discuss the estate without Marjorie or the neutral fiduciary involved. I wouldn't provide Sophie with financial help. I would consider limited contact only after a written apology and a concrete repayment plan. Mom responded that family should not need contracts. I wrote back, family should not need forged consent either. That was the last direct exchange we had. For a while I worried the legal action had changed me into someone hard. Then I realized hardness wasn't the same thing as a boundary. I hadn't crashed a wedding. I hadn't taken Sophie's personal savings. I hadn't invented evidence or spread rumors. I had stopped money from disappearing after my family sold property they knew Arthur had left to me. The process didn't give me back every afternoon at Arthur's kitchen table. It didn't return every coin he had touched. Some pieces of the collection were gone into private hands, and I had to accept compensation for objects I would rather have kept. But one tray came back. When I opened it for the first time, the faint smell of old paper and metal hit me so suddenly that I had to sit down. Arthur's handwritten labels were still tucked beneath several sleeves. His numbers were small and precise. On one card, he had written a note about a minting variation and added, "Show Leah." I cried then. Not at the dinner table. Not on the phone with Sophie. Not when Mom called me ungrateful. I cried alone with that note in my hand because it proved that before any of them turned the collection into wedding money, Arthur had seen exactly who cared enough to listen. I keep the first silver dime he gave me in a protective sleeve. It is still not the most valuable coin I own. It is the one I would never sell. I didn't take action because I wanted my sister's wedding to fail. I took action because my family treated my inheritance like a coupon they could redeem and my silence like consent. That was the day I stopped being the daughter who fixed everything and became the woman who signed her own name at the bottom of the complaint. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.